Hello everybody, welcome to yet another anime video here today. I've got something pretty special today, fellas. So, I want to preface real quick that I am very congested and I feel fine, but my voice is god-awful. I've recorded this video probably 6 times. Every single time I had some kind of problem. I either sounded unenthused or I just simply sounded like crap. So, we're rolling this over again. After 12 episodes of brain rot from the most unhinged anime I've ever seen, I can sufficiently say that I was peer pressured into taking drugs.
May I get to do unspeakable things to my sister this year?
So, I watched the quote-unquote Deer anime, also known as My Deer Friend Nokotan, which is a show that is designed to be comedic and really just made me question my reality. So, while the thousands of people that watched this show were laughing or smashing their skulls in while watching it, I took it upon myself to play the role of MatPat and turn something that makes no sense at all into something that is unnecessarily deep and somehow remains in your head for the next 12 hours. I'm not going to be explaining any of the characters, story, none of that. You guys are either going to have seen the show already, or you can go watch the show or just look it up on Google. Either way, we're going to be focusing on the theories, and I am going to be explaining what is going on in My Deer Friend Nokotan, because, oh boy, it's hard to understand. So, let's get started with the 4 darkest theories behind My Deer Friend Nokotan. Theory 1, mental illness. Starting off with the lamest and simplest explanation for the events of this show, we have the idea that Tarako Koshi, the main character, is severely mentally ill. Now, what mental illness she could have could be literally any psychotic disorder, and I'm not exactly a psychologist. However, I analyzed what parts of this theory make sense and don't make sense. So let's take a look. This is the least abstract theory, so I don't really need to explain how a mental illness could manifest things like delusions and hallucinations. For us, some evidence to support, this means that explaining all the impossible stuff that happens in the show is straightforward and can be waved aside like every UAP sighting that's ever occurred in the world. In terms of specific examples, basically everything can be included. However, the best example that we have will also be brought up later, and that is the end of episode 11, which includes this scene.
Haven't you girls seen her around?
Sister?
Huh?
Shika Noko? Who is that?
What?
Now, this is consciously disregarded in the last episode of the season, with nothing more than a humorous remark from the narrator, but this scene is probably the most important in the entire show, because it implies 2 things. Either the main character is imagining everything, or everything is in fact real, but everyone besides Koshi has their memories wiped of the information they are provided. This is very important later on, so keep this in mind. As for evidence against the theory, so unlike the other 3 theories I thought of for this, mental illness is something that is supposed to exclusively affect the main character's actions and perceptions. However, the extent that psychosis has to go to create everything that happens in this show is almost as unrealistic as not having an explanation at all. For example, Koshi's sister is notoriously obsessive and a downright yandere, and her behavior alone is eccentric and disturbing enough on top of all the stuff going on in the story. However, things get even weirder when you look into it. Let's look at things exclusively from the lens of the one clip that I showed. It's less than 10 seconds long, so there isn't much to go off of, but we can see a few important details. For starters, we know that Bashime and Anko are there, which means that there has to be a reason for them to have been brought together. Second fact is that they are in the Deer Club, which was obviously only made because of Shikanoko. Lastly, and least importantly, arguably, Anko is acting normal towards her sister and not like a deranged freak. So, what does this all mean? Well, this tells us that the people around Koshi have no knowledge of Shikanoko, yet they are set into the positions that they were before despite Shikanoko not being around. Now, this can be explained by saying that Koshi may have imagined Shikanoko playing into them joining the club, sort of like Reznov in Black Ops 1, where Mason imagines Reznov doing all this stuff that is really just Mason fighting everyone and killing everyone under the delusion that it's Reznov due to the brainwashing in Vorkuta. I don't really have any evidence to say that this isn't the case with Koshi and Shikanoko, or at least similar, I should say. But then we come to the question of whether they're in a Deer Club at all, and why. Well, you do have to look at who is in the club. Koshi, the one that is hypothetically suffering this psychosis, Koshi's sister, that is overly attached to her, and Bashime, which loves deer. Understandably, if Koshi was obsessed with her hallucinations and started a deer club, the only two that would join besides her would be her own sibling and someone that just likes deer and is pretty lazy and wouldn't want to join any of the other clubs. It's not that great of a stretch. So, mental illness is the most logical and straightforward theory, but this show is neither of those things, so you can choose to accept this theory or just move on to one of the others. And trust me, the others are far more insane. So let's get straight into them, shall we? Theory 2. Shikanoko is a pagan goddess that has the entire town mentally manipulated into a cult, but the main character is immune to it. This one's pretty long. It's not like the other one, which was basically just a small sentence. Now, this one heavily aligns with Supernatural and how the trickster operates in that show. So, Supernatural's trickster was technically an archangel, but let's look at it how the trickster worked early on in the famous Mystery Spot episode, where Sam Winchester is put in a time loop and has to watch his brother Dean die over and over again. Now, combined with the powers of the trickster, we look at the pagan gods that are also shown in Supernatural and join the rules of both of them. We know that Shikanoko has supernatural abilities that are so endless that you could just honestly look it up on the wiki. Either that or you've seen the show and you know every single episode is nothing but reality bending and time warping, basically. And she has obvious reality warping abilities that allow her to do whatever she wants. So, how is this important? Well, we have to look at what Shikanoko does in the show and, more importantly, how people react to her. For starters, the only person that is off-put by Shikanoko being a literal deer-human hybrid, and one that is capable of basically spawning items and thin matter in air, is Koshi. Everyone else in the show infamously has zero reaction at all, and they even seem completely ignorant of pain, as shown in Shikanoko's very funny introduction to the school in episode 1. Then, during the hyper-embarrassing face-off between Anko and Shikanoko, there is somehow an omniscient knowledge of Koshi that nobody should physically even have access to. Like, God probably doesn't want to know what's going on under your shirt, no less some random teacher magically knowing. Additionally, when shown next to other deer, nobody besides Koshi can see that Shikanoko is obviously not fully deer. Now, if you've ever seen the Sandman TV show, the famously disturbing episode titled 24/7 is basically the perfect representation of what is going on here. Against the will of every person that's in Hino City, they are all forced into a state of reality where nothing is questioned. Everyone's personalities are warped, and they are mindlessly in a state of acceptance with Shikanoko. This is evident especially in the Sports Festival episode, where Shikanoko essentially just takes control of the whole thing and blatantly rigs it multiple times, and nobody ever questions or resists it. Koshi's privacy rights are broken an infinite number of times, and when Shikanoko makes a suggestion, it's basically the word of a master, as seen with the Flower Club scene later on in the season. The only two that are affected differently are the two Koshi sisters, and we don't even know to what extent Anko is being affected, as we don't know how obsessive she is outside of the show's narrative. Meanwhile, Torako becomes the opposite of everyone else and becomes self-aware enough to completely break the fourth wall, almost as effectively as Monica from Doki Doki Literature Club. So, you have two that are unaffected, being the main character who gains self-awareness and is perpetually confused of what's going on like everyone else, and her sister. Now, the reason I point her sister out is because her sister is just as eccentric and unrealistic as the events that are unfolding around them. And while Torako seems sort of, not unbothered, but unsurprised by her sister's behavior, it's possible that she acts like this already. However, I think it's connected to everything else, and I think her personality is being warped to an extent. Remember, we don't know how much information is being left out or how much is being distorted. I mean, when you get into reality benders, you can't really trust anything. Now, what about the cult part? Well, aside from having everyone under her thumb, Shikanoko is literally worshipped as the deer goddess at the shrine in episode 8. And everyone thinks nothing of drinking soup made of freaking antlers. And that's not even counting all the times people have thought nothing of consuming food that Shikanoko has offered in some form, despite it likely tasting terrible or being harmful to humans. Now, This introduces a point that I referenced earlier when I talked about pain and the fact that people ignore pain when in the presence of Shikanoko. Now, this is common, and as I referenced the episode from Sandman earlier, this is a thing that is frequent in mind control, brainwashing, that kind of thing in fiction. Whenever somebody is being controlled or manipulated mentally using some sort of supernatural ability, not just simple manipulation, they often experience pain, but the pain doesn't register for them. Now, instinctively, animals and really most organisms avoid pain. That is assuming they can feel it, of course. When pain is induced, the thing that it is induced upon usually tries to avoid the pain. The thing they don't usually do is not react to it at all. That shows some sort of significant problem going on, whether it be a lack of nerve response or some sort of lack of processing, whatever it may be. It's not a good sign. It never is. And so because of that, frequently what ends up happening is when you get people who are warping other people's minds, or rather anything that's warping people's minds, starts to alter their ability to react to pain, and they stop reacting to it. So in the case that I'm providing here, because Shikanoko is around, she is able to give food to all these people, and a lot of the time she's given deer crackers or grass. Well, unless you're a toddler, you're not going to want to eat grass, ever. And you're especially not, which they even say this in the show, the deer crackers are supposed to taste terrible. And yet, she just passes them out like candy, and people, a lot of the time, just simply eat whatever she's given. Nobody, and I mean nobody, is going to randomly, voluntarily bite into an antler, ever, or drink a soup made of antlers without some sort of, explicit recipe. And the way they describe the process of making the soup is horrifying. And everybody just goes along with it. And they blindly go along with it, too. There is no negative response. There is no fear, no questioning, no doubt, nothing. It is a total lack of self-awareness on the part of everyone besides the main character. The entire shrine is dedicated to Shikanoko, and nobody is worshiping any god or spirits besides her. So, to summarize, Shikanoko has control over everyone in Hino City. She can alter the thoughts of the people around her, and she can bend reality in the space around her. That said, when she is gone in episode 11, as she went outside of Hino, suddenly people can't remember who she is, besides the only one unaffected to begin with, being Koshi. Now, back to the shrine, and that whole idea, it's odd that nobody worships anything else. Normally at Japanese shrines, they're going there for some sort of spiritual thing, or they're going there with either a particular figure in mind or nothing in mind. But let me tell you what they're not doing. They're not going to a shrine and looking at something they see as a deer and worshiping the deer. Regular people don't randomly worship deer, and they especially don't randomly worship a half deer, half human that is for some reason in the shrine with a crappy, I can't even say costume, what do you even call that? And they just don't question it at all. And they're downright worshiping her. Which, I feel like I don't have to tell you, most characters in fiction that want to be worshipped aren't usually the best figures. That's not even in fiction, really. That's just in general. So that shows a pretty bad sign when it comes to Shikanoko and the whole city just casually coming to this shrine, praying to her, doing all this stuff. I mean, it's weird. Everyone's caught up in it besides Koshi, like a trance-like state. And so we're moving on. What this all means is that Shikanoko is a malicious pagan goddess that treats wherever she goes as a personal playground, and she has zero qualms with bending reality, making up whatever rules she wants, messing with people around her, making other people conform to the way she wants things to be, and she has gotten a whole area's worth of people to worship her, most specifically indicated by the crazy old deer lady in episode 5 and 8, which, if you've ever seen the show, I feel like I don't need to explain to you why that lady is off the deep end and how unsettling that is. When she moves out of the range of an area, everyone's memories get wiped and she can freely move wherever else she wants. So this is indicated by episode 11. When she moves out of range of the area, because that's at the end of the episode she's gone, and she's no longer in Hino as shown in the next episode, Everyone besides Koshi, who's already unaffected, or seemingly unaffected, have no knowledge of her. Then she returns the next episode, everyone knows who she is again, and it is pretty much just reversed. So this can be explained by, if she's within range, everyone has knowledge of her and loves her. If she's out of range, she no longer exists in their perceived reality. All of this ultimately proves that Shikanoko is the villain of the show and completely explains everything on a fundamental level. The specifics don't matter so much as the why everything is happening. Once again, the specifics are all wacky, cartoonish nonsense, but they don't matter in terms of evidence. The evidence is building why this is all happening, what is going on. Well, what is going on? They're all being manipulated by Shikanoko, which is basically this pagan goddess or some sort of anomalous entity that is controlling everybody and warping reality around them. And her power seems to have a range that it works on. I'm going to say, for lack of a better example, it works kind of like a sphere that's around her, right? An aura, if you will. And so, around her, within a certain vicinity, not any particular distance, people are afflicted by the reality that she creates. Because, to them, if what everyone perceives is true to you, then it's the truth. It's not factual, but it becomes the truth because everybody accepts it as it is what it is what it is. And that's what it's become. And nobody listens to Koshi, so that is the reality everybody is living in. This also makes the whole idea of Shikanoko being a mind-warping pagan goddess that is a malicious entity, makes the opening theme and the little transitions with Shikanoko scarier, as they become a bit more malicious, with them working as a constant echo of her name. It is the perfect echo of worshipping a particular figure, in this case, worshipping Shikanoko. The only thing that this theory doesn't explain is why Koshi has self-awareness, but I think this could be a reversed effect of Shikanoko and everyone else. It may even be intentional, as Shikanoko seems unbothered by the fact that Koshi is self-aware, although she never acknowledges it herself. That is, of course, why we have the last theory, but before that, Theory 3. My Deer Friend Nokotan takes place in the SCP universe. Alright, I know I've done a hypothetical on this one before, but this time isn't much of a hypothetical. So, this is more of an expansion upon Theory 2 by introducing some evidence that I didn't mention before. So taking all of what was discussed before, we know that Shikanoko is a dangerous reality bender that is capable of altering the minds of living organisms. But what exactly is she? It isn't exactly certain what the hell Shikanoko is, beyond being an anomalous combination of a deer and human, but we do know that Shikanoko is literally impossible to keep in confinement unless she is intentionally being dramatic, as seen in the last episode of the show. Additionally, we know based off of her manipulation of everything around her and her exploitation of said things that she is, more or less, a malicious entity. With this, we can easily label Shikanoko as a Keter-class SCP that is both extremely dangerous and incredibly volatile, which, of course, also makes her nearly impossible to contain. What makes this all add up, though, is something that you might want to put a seatbelt on for, ladies and gentlemen. In the beginning of Episode 5, a flashback shows Shikanoko running from men that look like they're wearing normal hunter outfits, yet they have military-grade weapons, including a whole freaking minigun, and they have at least 3 attack helicopters that are pursuing Shikanoko. My guess is that these would be Mobile Task Force Unit Epsilon 6, designated village idiots, which were intending on eliminating her or simply recontaining her. Given how powerful and blatantly obvious she is, it's no wonder that they would need overwhelming firepower to recontain her, not to mention the bullets probably wouldn't even kill her. I mean, she gets killed at the end of episode 2 and gets kicked out of heaven and forced back into her body by a hallucination of deer Jesus. We're not even going to get into all that. When you think about the area that Shikanoko is affecting, we're talking about Hino City, which is located in the Tokyo metropolis. So, if you're looking at what the Foundation would focus on, this is definitely that kind of thing. The population is estimated at 192.61 thousand as of 2025, which means that this nearly is a 200,000 people's worth population that are all having their minds manipulated by an entity with zero regard to consent or empathy. Screw SCP-682, the last thing you want is this reality-bending deer with the brain of a toddler making an entire chunk of the Kanto region's people their personal playthings. As for the hunter that appears later on, I think in the last 2 episodes, this could be either from the Foundation, a group of interest, or he could simply be a solo hunter. Considering he wants to kill Shikanoko and his motivations are never clearly stated, it's possible that he was sent by someone. I doubt that he's GOC, otherwise he would come up with a squad and local police would be informed to stay out of his way. He may simply be an independent hero, and the only thing we know about him is that he's American with an American wife. It's slightly possible that he's with the UIU, but I doubt he would be sent alone and with no word to the government of Japan, not to mention it's kind of out of their jurisdiction. He could also simply be CIA, which doesn't really need an explanation. However, he isn't working with a team and still seems to be called by his wife at a bad time, and I would assume field agents don't just get called by their spouse. The hunter also seems to be taunted constantly by Shikanoko, and they nearly have a duel, which ends conveniently before it begins. And before Shikanoko can cosplay as poor man's Darth Maul. Seriously, that reference was grotesque, but we're not going to get into all that. I'm not sure who he is, but he may be more of a solo cryptid hunter than a full-blown group of interest. As for the SCP Foundation, it would be far too risky to engage Shikanoko when she's practically holding a whole city area hostage. So they may find it easier to just leave her be, since she hasn't exactly killed anyone or made anyone question her existence. Well, to the extent that is known to the world, at least. Now, we have one more theory, ladies and gentlemen. The theory that explains it all, but is easily the darkest and the one that I'm going to try to ignore, because this is actually one of the first main theories I came up with that somehow came before mental illness. Here we go, fellas. Theory 4. Tarako Koshi is in hell. So, we've been doing a lot of focusing on Shikanoko this entire video. But, what if, instead of being the villain, what if Shikanoko was actually the victim in all of this? There is one piece of information that has been left out of all of these theories, and that's Koshi's past as a delinquent in middle school. She left behind the life of being a delinquent to be a perfect girl with perfect looks and a perfect record. Question is, why? We're told by Anko that the main character became a delinquent because they read too much shonen manga, and the delinquents that are encountered later in the show challenge Koshi to a fight. The fight ends in a somewhat win as Shikanoko nukes them with one of her antlers. Details aside, the idea that Koshi used to be a delinquent is both important and unimportant for whatever reason, and despite being the driving force for the first couple of episodes, it's no longer relevant after the sports festival episode. Which begs the question, why even have it at all? The thing is, we return to the clip from earlier. Koshi is the only one that seems to know about Shikanoko, and the others are confused. Then, we remember something else. Everyone seems to know everything about Koshi. There are consistently images of the characters that are taken from the view of the audience and not from an actual camera, and every single event in the show is focused on Koshi in some way. More specifically, the events are focused on making her miserable in one way or another, especially at the start of the show. Everything that happens is embarrassing, humiliating, or punishing for Koshi. However, she's the only one that can feel it. She's the only one that understands that something is wrong, and she's the only one that questions her reality. Another unsettling thing, there are consistently deer throughout the show that are simply walking around in 3D, and they are never acknowledged by anyone, including Shikanoko. There are deer characters, kinda, if you can even call them characters, but some are just there. The only one that seems to notice them is Koshi, and that's if anyone notices them at all. They're just there. They stare, and that's it. They watch and do nothing but watch. They make no noise, they have basic animation, and nobody ever even acknowledges their existence. They're just this presence. Then, there's the way death works, or rather doesn't work in this show. No character dies no matter what happens to them, and Koshi is the only one that seems to experience pain despite the grotesque injuries that are sustained by some of the characters. And so, all of this eternal state of worry and punishment centered around one person that tries to be above it all and is always beneath it all, is Koshi. The question is, why her? Let me propose an idea. I'm going to paint you a picture. Back when she was a delinquent, Koshi accidentally killed somebody. That somebody was a girl named Noko Shikanoko. That girl had a love for deer, and she was downright obsessed with them. And when she died, she may have been killed against or near a power line, which would poetically be shown when Koshi first meets Shikanoko in episode 1. One day, Koshi was killed in some form, be it a car accident or even just a freak occurrence, by a deer. Now, she's haunted by her past William Afton style, and Shikanoko is a manifestation of her guilt. Her sister, Anko, is there as a person she recognizes, similar to a dream or a nightmare, but it's a distorted and obsessive version. She's a taunting reflection of how Tarako viewed her sister before she died, and now she's forced to live in a reality where that is actually how she is. Bashime can represent many things, but I think she could represent one of the friends of the girl that was killed. Either that, or she is actually closer to the girl's original appearance, while Shikanoko is meant to embody the deer aspect more. All of this mayhem, the lack of privacy, the spotlight on Koshi, serves to remind her that she is nothing. She has no control, no power, and she is exposed for the world around her to see constantly. She is reduced to a tsundere that serves the guilt she brought upon herself, and she is always being watched. As a subcategory of Theory 1, you can say that Koshi is still alive, but Shikanoko is simply a manifestation of her guilt as a form of PTSD. So this takes Theory 4 and Theory 1 and combines them together. So, rather than being in hell, she is still alive, but she has PTSD and Shikanoko doesn't exist, and that's just a manifestation of her guilt. This would be more logical, but it's a bit surprising that nobody would notice such a thing. Plus, it doesn't explain the self-awareness element, and doesn't explain the deer that are just around places. Now, you could say that's her PTSD, but she also doesn't react to them all the time, even when they're blatantly right there. Now, you could say that, like some people, once they hallucinate so much or get used to it, they start to ignore it sometimes, but I can't speak for that. And I'm not a mental health professional, so I'm not going to get into all that. So, that's it, everyone. I have created the darkest anime theories for a show that is meant to be silly and goofy. Summarizing it, either Koshi has a mental illness, Shikanoko is some kind of pagan god / anomalous entity that is reality bending and manipulating the minds of everyone, or Koshi is in hell. And this is all just one big punishment for her, a big reflection of her guilt and sorrow. So, which one do I believe? Well, if I had to pick one based on which one has the most evidence and which one is the most middle ground, I would say the one with the pagan goddess and Shikanoko being that. I think that one is the most accurate. Theory 2. Because Theory 2 has the most evidence, it is the most self-explanatory, it is vague enough, but, I mean, what more do you really need? We know she bends reality. We know she at least has some sort of impact on the minds of others. The idea that they forget who she is when she exits a certain range also makes sense for somebody that is, or I say somebody, you could say something is also a way you could word it, that is manipulating the minds of everyone, and Koshi, since she's self-aware, is the only one that isn't affected by this, or her self-awareness could be the effect of this in a strange reversal. The theory about Koshi being in hell can make sense, but it's far too vague, and also the symbolism is a little bit grasping at straws. The first one is simple, and honestly is probably more accurate, but I think it's kind of boring, and also, I mean, you think if you're that delusional, eventually somebody would notice, right? So, that is all for this time. Did you think any of the theories were good? Do you have any theories of your own, genuine theories? Down in the comments. Let me know down there. This has been the Everyman, everybody. Have a fantastic day and a fantastic life. Hopefully I get over this congestion because it's really making me mad. Goodbye, everyone.